This is a recording of F. Gibson Butler of 516 Highland, East Lansing, Michigan, 48823. Phone number is area code 517-332-1961. The interview was conducted by Jim Walkinshaw and Helen Earley at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing, Michigan on August 16, 1988. It is made up of 2 tapes, of which this is the first. Okay, we're on.
All right.
That's all right. Shoot with the phone.
In April 1941, when I was first employed at Oldsmobile, and I went into the plant engineering department. A man by the name of Harry Beeman was the plant engineer.
Remember him.
Joe Newman was his assistant. Sort of an assistant to Joe. Like some of the fellows that were there were Stu Rutter, Chet Hawks, Leonard Sampla. There was a fellow by the name of Sauer that I can see him, but I don't remember what he did. He was an architect, actually. But we were a small department that, as far as the engineering was concerned.
That was in Building 40 at that time?
Building 40. And we still had light welts in the building, if you remember.
Oh, yeah. Open ceiling?
Yeah. It was it was just prior to World War II, of course, and there was a lot of activity, but Harry Beeman himself was a great big man, very gruff. At least a lot of people were afraid of him. But he probably was one of the greatest people I ever worked for. He was really, he was understanding, he was supportive, just a grand gentleman. He had a son that worked at the Forge plant for a long time, Wiley Beeman.
Wiley, yes, I remember him also.
But then he died of a heart attack. Well, we got into World War II, of course, and then all automotive activity ceased immediately. And the plant engineering department was really under pressure because we were the birds that had to take all that stuff out and store it, but also we had to get ready for war production. We already had the one plant going, which was the 20mm cannon, for which we were famous. And
where was that being made?
Building, I think it was building 36.
Down in the engine plant area.
Well, it wasn't all the way down there.
Yeah.
That was 28.
Yeah.
We were on building 36.
Okay.
And then that was the big thing. Then we began over at the Forge plant. We began making shells and things like that. We then took on a contract for a 35mm cannon and a 75mm cannon, which we built in building 34. Building 56 was a new building that year. I remember we were fortunate to be able to get a crane into it before they stopped building things like that, an overhead crane. And one of my jobs was to install that thing. And I showed them, I had worked in heavy construction at one time, and I showed them I knew all the tricks for getting those beams up there. So I was given that responsibility. Not really important, but it had to be done by somebody.
Was the little firing range structure out in the yard at
that
that
was
time?
not built as yet.
Not built yet.
But it was being built, and in fact that was Jake Corr's, or Francis J. Corr's, first major contract with Oldsmobile. He was the contractor for that proof range, a man by the name of Vern Yallop, who worked over in engineering later, was put in charge of the proof range.
Where exactly was that located?
Right south of the product engineering building, which was building
Building
64.
64. And it was underground. And
What did you do there? Do you remember what?
fired cannons. Holy
Okay.
Catootin, we had these 20 millimeter cannons, and you actually fired them. Those are automatic and they fired into they had drums of cylinders, let's say, of sand and absorbent, and you fire right directly into it. There were five stations where you'd set up a gun and fire it. All the guns got fired.
How far away was the target, so to speak?
Oh,
Not very close?
75 feet out.
Oh, it wasn't very far.
No, it wasn't very far.
Yeah.
And they tested every gun?
Yeah. Every 20 millimeter gun. 30, I think the 37, was that 35 or 37? I don't know. 35 millimeter. I guess.
35.
They also fired those there, but this, of course, the 75 millimeter cannon.
Big gun.
That's a big gun.
Yeah.
75 millimeters is 3 inches. That's a big shell.
Didn't we build 90 millimeter too?
Yes,
That
we
was
did.
later.
Oh,
But that was a much later gun, and there we didn't build a lot of those. I want to make a point here that one of the major contributions to the way guns were manufactured was made on the 20 millimeter cannon, and it was an idea of John Coleman, who was at that time master mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
But we used to drill in this country, every place else, we used to drill these things, and it'd take forever. And John Coleman said, we ought to be able to broach those. And you know what a broach is?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So we tried it, and it was so great. We cut 4 hours out of the time it took to make each 20 millimeter gun. I say we. When I speak of we, it's Oldsmobile.
Collectively, yeah.
But John Coleman, that to me was one of the great war contributions by an Oldsmobile engineer for that particular thing. And that was adapted all over in the arsenals and every place else, because we could just, our production just went skyrocketed.
Didn't we sort of had very low-cost guns, too, as I remember, kind of beat the pants off everybody.
I can't answer that question because I don't. See, I was in plant engineering in my time.
Yeah, wasn't on that side.
For example, we were in building 34. I remember once that the machines, we just couldn't make anything with those machines because the machines were jointed, so they were bolted together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they had to have really good foundations under them. I had to move every machine and put foundations under them. And I did 28 machines in a week.
Mm.
And I kept the crew 36 hours once. And boy, did I ever really get it from John Dykstra. He was really mad.
See, Dykstra was the works manager?
Yeah. Because he said, don't you know you can't do that? I said, I just asked the guys if they'd like to work. I said, I didn't tell anybody they had to.
That's great.
And it worked. He said, well, Butler, don't you ever do it again. I mean,
were people in that time frame when the war was going on, were they more willing to really get in and give it their all, so to speak, or not?
I think they were, but I don't think they were more willing in time of war than at any other time. I think first that the pride in working for Oldsmobile and pride in living in your community have more to do with it than the fact that we were at war.
Okay.
Yes, the war was an incentive. But I remind everybody, and I've done this for years, that Oldsmobile never had a strike either.
That's
and
right.
What that says to me is that we had excellent employee relations. We communicated, in other words. That the people that were Brandel and Mahoney and Schultz and all these people knew how to talk to the to the hourly people. There's another thing that maybe played a role in Oldsmobile's great public relations with their employees, and that is that I think that if there was a study made, could be determined that there was a high degree of home ownership in the Lansing area, as opposed to, let's say, Flint or Detroit or some of these places. And that pride, community pride, may have been a contributor to Oldsmobile's success in employee relations. But there's another thing that also, the trick was to make people who worked at Oldsmobile feel like they were a part of it, whether they were hourly rate or salaried or what they were. Everybody felt like they were a part of it. And for example, a man who, to me, really represented the greatest in management was Sherrod Skinner. And when Mr. Skinner used to walk through those plants, he didn't just sit in some ivory office. And he came to us from Turnstead. He came before I was there, but he's a very distinguished, very proud gentleman, fun to talk to if you got to know him. But he took us into the war period, but he also took us out of it. And that's something to remember. Mr. Skinner's not dead. He represented to me that was great in managerial skills. And he was a grand gentleman. He had as many heartaches as a lot of other people did. He had twin sons and a daughter. The one son was killed I can't remember, it was in World War II or in Korea. Can't remember. I do remember that he received the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously. The other son had polio. Those are the twin sons, and there's a daughter. So you see, heartache comes to a lot of people, and because he held that position, didn't exclude him.
True.
I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah.
But yet, through it all, he served us, and served us well. It was a privilege to know Mr. Skinner. An interesting sidelight, Bob Barlow, who later became a plant engineer, in World War I was a submarine officer. And as I understand it, Sherrod Skinner served under him in World War I.
Interesting.
I'm certain that can be verified. And as a consequence, he and Bob Barlow had a lifelong friendship. So those are, but Mr. Skinner really did run a tight ship. He was good at it, and he didn't put up with any. One of our executives, and I'm not going to say which one because it doesn't make any difference, had one divorce, maybe two. I didn't know him very well, but he left, and as I understand it, because in those days you didn't, as an executive, you didn't do those kinds of things. You get divorces and things like that. And I think Mr. Skinner suggested to him that it might be better if he went someplace else. He did. I won't even tell you where he went. I do know. I don't think it's because somebody goes through these archival type, narrations, and you find it, and they dig that up and they use that.
That's not the purpose.
Yeah, and that only hurts.
No, that's
hurts
not.
Oldsmobile.
That's
and that.
not the
I don't
purpose.
want to get involved with that.
Well, go back to your plant engineering experiences then.
Well, I can't remember all the responsibilities I had. One of my responsibilities was to go through which didn't take too long, maybe an hour and a half or so, was to go through every building every day to make sure that everything was progressing and all the engineers were getting what they needed. That was just one of them, but that was a minor one. I did a lot of design, a lot of structural design. I didn't do machine design because we had a tool department. I did some specialized machine design, in which we built a whole machine or something. I did those kinds of things. I can't remember anything in particular that was outstanding. I just did it because it was there to be done.
Yeah. How long did you stay then in plant engineering? When
I
did
stayed
you-
in plant engineering for 2 years, 11 and a half months. And I quit.
You actually just quit?
I quit.
You quit the department?
Or you quit
I
Oldsmobile?
quit Oldsmobile.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I don't,
What year was that, Gil?
I don't know, 1944.
Yeah, must have been right around the end of the war.
No, it was before the end,
Okay.
long before.
then
You
took
want to know
off,
why?
yeah.
I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I was offered a commission by the Marine Corps, and you had to get a release, just like taking another job in writing, in order to accept the commission. I went through all the physical exams and the mental, or the written exams and all the rest of it. And the man, procurement officer in Detroit, told me that he was sure I was on my way in. One of the things you had to do, you had to get 3 letters. They got letters, but I had to get 3. And one of the people that I asked for a letter for was from Joe.
A letter of recommendation?
Yeah, kind of. It was from Joe Newman. He was now a plant engineer. I let it go for a couple of weeks, and I hadn't received the letter, so I went and asked him about it. He said, I already wrote him a letter and told him we couldn't release you. Couldn't have. I said, you did. I said, you didn't tell me that though, did you? He said, no. I went home and I thought about it, and I came back and I said, I'm leaving. I said, I don't work for disabled people. That's the way I viewed it, whether he was or was not is not. Harold Good, who had just become director of salary personnel, helped me to get out, but he also kept after me to come back for 5 months. I went to Cold Hold when I didn't enjoy it. They're too small, too.
Cold Hole is a
They make refrigeration.
refrigeration equipment?
Yeah. Well, there I did do some. We were just getting into high altitude work, and I did design a cabinet, a test facility, so that you could get high vacuum, ultra low temperatures, and high temperatures, all in the same system. And I
To
did
try and simulate high
Yeah,
altitude flying.
That's right, for instruments in particular. Instruments were the ones that were in trouble. But then I came back to Oldsmobile. What happened was that I'd see Harold Good every once in a while, or he'd call me up and ask me how I was doing. He'd say, we really like to have you back. So I said, well, I said, not in plant engineering. I said, you can never get me there. I said, I will not work for Joe Newman. And he said, well, you wouldn't have to. But he had 5 jobs. Finally, I went back. And I took the one in product engineering. Mr. Metzel hired me.
How long were you with Cold Hold?
5 months. 5 months too long, but I mean, I had a very selfish motive in wanting to get in the Marine Corps. It offered an opportunity, but the greater opportunity was to get in, serve, and get out. I wanted to go to California Institute of Technology and study fluid dynamics under von Karman, who was then there. And he, without question, was one of the great aerodynamicists or fluid dynamicists of in that era, and even today there isn't anybody to compare to him. Some of his accomplishments made possible bridges like the Mackinac Bridge, things like that, airplane. He was just that, but that's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to study under. Well, I didn't have the money, was married, and by this time I'd had a child, and I couldn't see how I was going to do this. I guess that what I should have done is just said, fool, and done it anyhow. But at any rate, I went to work under Gilbert Burrell, who was then chief draftsman in what might have been termed the motor group, and it was actually we're working on guns. I remember the first thing I had to work on was the 20 millimeter cannon, which was used in aircraft. And by the Navy. And what happened was frequently when these aircraft would land on the deck of a carrier, there were 4 of them in the wings. If there was a shell in the chamber, and the firing pin would drop, might fall forward, and then it would fire, and they're contact exploding shells.
Oh, God.
So the first thing I did when I went back to Oldsmobile, Gilbert Burrow said to me, he said, "What do you know about guns?" And I said, "Nothing." He said, "I'd like to have you take a look at this thing, see if you can figure out a sear," that the term sear refers to a little piece in a gun that keeps the firing pin from falling forward. It sort of holds it back, stops it. He said, "I'd like to see if you can figure out a way to make that thing work so that won't happen if you jar the gun." So I fooled around for about a week, and I said, "Well, I think I got a thing that might work." So in our machine shop, engineering machine shop, we built a couple of those things, or made a couple of those things, and they put them in guns. And I can't remember how they applied a force, a jiggling force in the proof range, but they seemed to work. I remember this distinctly because the Army and Navy who did things, I forgot what they called them, but these people, they wanted to go to production right away, and I said, "You're crazy." I said, "You don't even know if that thing will fail." I said, "How do you know that it's design rate?" I said, "That's an idea." They said, "We cannot afford to wait." So they went. That was the first thing I did for Oldsmobile in product engineering. Then later on, I don't remember particularly. Oh yeah, I worked on an electric firing pin once. They had another guy working on it, and I don't think he knew very much about electricity at any rate, so I did work on that thing, and I don't recall a lot about it. I don't even know if we built any because I wasn't that interested.
Were you in Building 64 at this time?
Yes.
Is that where you were?
Then after the war ended, let us say, and the day before Thanksgiving of 1945, at 11 o'clock in the morning, General Motors went on strike. And we went out. I took everything with me because I wasn't going to stay. No strike was going to stop and keep me from working or doing something I was going to. At any rate, we went through Thanksgiving, and on Friday, got this telephone call from Gilbert Burrow, and he said, "We're going to pick you up Monday morning." I said, "You are?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "We're going to take you to the proving ground. We're going to set up a place out there because the proving ground was all salaried, so we didn't have a strike problem."
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Like, not our people, but the proving ground people. So we went out there and worked, and I said, "Why did you call me?" He says, "Because we figured you were going out and either get another job or leave the area." And I said, "You're exactly right. If you'd have waited till Monday noon, I'd have been gone." I wouldn't. I said, "I don't have any loyalties to anybody but the man in my mirror." And he said, "That's what we thought would happen." Well, anyway. So then we worked at the proving ground, and I would get Ralph Mosier, who was running the power plant and that sort of stuff, to go into our office, and I'd tell him what file for stuff was, and he'd take it out, and I'd go out to his house and get it. We ever got
I wonder how he sneaked that out. Didn't they have the guy standing by the gates like they always did?
Sure, but you wear big clothes, you know. No, you don't carry a briefcase.
Okay.
Heck no, you put it in your clothes. No, I got it. Incidentally, going back to plant engineering for a while, I forgot some of the fine people that worked there, like Ralph Mosher was in it, and Bill Mouts, and Bill Rasmussen, Chet Hawks. These are all names of engineers, I'm not talking about out in the plant or anything. But we also had, within plant engineering, because we had all these various departments other than engineering, we had I don't remember, but we had people like John Coulter, who was really a super ran a department. I can't remember what department he ran. But we had people like that made plant engineering really function. People that really know how to communicate. Getting back to product engineering, of course, when the strike lasted 100 and some days, I can't remember how long, it didn't make a difference. But we kept working, and we had all these designs. And
Now, what were you working on?
what was I working on?
Yeah.
I can't even remember.
Was it guns or butter?
Oh no, oh no, the war's
The
over.
war's over, so you're working on...
Boy, we rolled everything up the day the war was over.
Mhm.
That put an end to. In fact, the week before, I had started to work on engines to take a look at it,
Mhm.
see what we might be doing. And of course, the first thing we had to be concerned about was what the end of the war was, to get back into production of what we'd already been making
Mhm.
in 1941, which we did. That was an important thing to get. So we got ready to build, from the engine viewpoint, we got ready to build those old line engines.
Yeah.
We've been building 8-cylinder and 6-cylinder engines.
What were those? Those were all made out in 28 at that time? Way out on the east side of the plant?
Yeah. Yeah, they're all made in building 28.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there are other buildings involved. I think, I can't remember them
Yeah.
all. Building 36.
33, those,
Yeah, they're all
part of that.
Yeah, they're all part of that same complex.
Do you remember where the engine assembly line was?
Not for those engines, I don't.
Okay.
Not too well. I think possibly it would have been in building 33 or 28, because if you could see a picture.
I've got a picture that
Of a
shows
show.
it along a window wall of a building.
But
Which
we had a picture that
looks-
showed you taking the engines on these flat trucks
Yeah.
over to building 16, to the assembly line. If you could see them coming out of a building, you'd know where the assembly line
Yeah.
was.
I think it's in 28,
Well, that could be well true.
along the east wall.
Could be.
Okay.
I don't
Anyway,
know
that's-
particularly. I don't.
It's all right.
It was not my job
No,
to.
I know. Just curious to see if you had gotten
well,
down there.
I went out, but not any oftener than I had to.
Yeah.
I wasn't that interested, and I had far greater interest. Well, at any rate, then I can't remember when the paper was published, but there was a paper published by, Kettering's name was on it, about tryptane fuel that had been developed by General Motors Research prior to and during World War II. We used to have a little refinery at Redford.
Yeah, I was interested to read that in that little document that you had put together. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and it was that gives, well, what actually happened, Gilbert Burrell said to Tony Waters, myself, wish you guys would go down and find out what this tryptane stuff is and see if we can use it. Well, very honestly, you couldn't use it, but that was all right. But then we went to work on, we started working on new engines and looking at a lot of concepts. There were Gilbert Burrell, there weren't very many of us, but Gilbert Burrell and myself and a fellow by the name of Orland Anderson and Herb Holmes and maybe Bill Holt. I think that was about all.
Mm-hmm.
Tony Waters, we had a couple of, Swede Ronquist, we had a couple of project engineers. And we worked on an engine which we called the SV-49, which would be a V8 engine, new V8. What really happened was that Gilbert Burrell had a tremendous talent, really. He was a great design engineer. See, in the old days, you had to be an engineer. To be a good designer, you had to be an engineer first. You didn't really. You really had, it's a different kind of approach to engineering than it is today. All the engineers want to be project engineers. Well, they ought to learn something about how you really do things too. At any rate, we worked, he had all these sketches of cars, engines in them, really talented. Stack them up like mad. One night, Wolfram was our chief engineer, and Gilbert always kept the drafting board for himself. And one evening, let's say about 5 o'clock or so, Wolfman came out to talk to him, ask him a question. He looks at us and he said, "What's all that?" And Burl said, "Well, it had to have something to do." And he got Skinner on the phone, and the next morning they were there. I remember this because Gilbert said, "There are some details you remember, you wonder why." I said, "Butler," he said, "you got to be in at 7:30. I said, "I do." I said, "That's all right." Skinner and Wolfram were there. Both of them came in about that time, 7:30. And there were 4 of us stood around this darn board. And Skinner got so excited that he made, let's see, Wolfram and he, went to Detroit and talked about that engine. So we got permission, the money to build 4 engines. In the meantime, the Ford Motor Company was being revitalized with Ernie Breach, who'd been hired by Henry Ford II to head the Ford Motor Company and revitalize it. And some of the people that were there by this time or went there were John Dykstra and Harold Youngren. Harold Youngren was the vice president in charge of engineering, and John Dykstra became their manufacturing vice president. Later became president of Ford Motor Company. However, the reason I don't forget it is because this was 6 weeks before we were going to come out with the rocket, and we were having failures experimentally. We had this great big meeting. Just that morning of the meeting, I got this analysis done. And I remember a fellow by the name of Bob Schilling came from research, and a fellow by the name of Purchase, not Homer Purchase, Bill Purchase, who was no relative, but it was chief engineer of Diesel Equipment Division at any rate. They went into this meeting, and I took these curves in. I told them what was wrong and what we would have to do. Bob Schilling got up and says, "You don't need me, I'm going back to Detroit." He says, "He knows more about it than I do." And that really bailed us out. Well, getting back to the 1957 engine now, what I did was, in order to get this upshift speed up to 4,600, I finally put in a heavier or higher load valve spring so that I could get the engine speed up. That'd keep the lifters from pumping up. Well, I did a stress analysis, and it was 160,000 pounds per square inch stress. I always had a bogey of 150,000 pounds per square inch as absolute maximum. Well, I exceeded it. And we ran, we can get away with that. I'm trying to win a popularity contest. Okay. Yeah. So we scrapped $38,000 worth of valve springs. We put this stupid valve spring into the engine plant for new engines. January the 14th of 1957, all hell broke loose. It was a Saturday. In a little town of Lakeview, it was 20 below up near Grand Rapids. We lost 6 customers lost engines that morning. They'd go out, they'd start their engine, and it would idle. All right. The contact stress was too high. Everybody used used Mobil oil, and they had no extreme pressure additive. And if you want the technical name, I'll give it to you. Zinc. Okay. At any rate, but it was my fault. I've never blamed another person for that failure. It cost us several millions of dollars to get
How do
out.
we fix that, yeah?
Huh?
What do we do to fix that?
I can't remember. One of the things we did that we'd never had before, we developed a cold room test, 30 starts.
Oh, yeah.
So that doesn't fix it.
No, but that was kind of the start of the cold room then on engines?
No, Oldsmobile had a cold room from 1937.
Oh, okay.
during World War
All
II, they were the only place that could test tanks for a long time.
Mhm.
Take the tracks off, but we'd get them in the cold room. Incidentally, when that cold room was built, 4 men died in there when the coils tipped over and swept before they got it
Crushed up?
Mhm.
Oh, my.
You don't hear about that, do you?
Nope.
I think it was 1937, but I wasn't there then.
Yeah.
But at any rate, in this cold room test, no, we'd always done cold room, but not this particular test. And at any rate, we had to have, I can't remember what we did. I did some redesign on, I could change the taper on the cam for one thing, and that would help. Oh, I know one of the things I did. Got the cams widened by 1/16 of an inch, which we'd always wanted. But up to that time, the damn foundry would say, "Oh, we can't do a thing like that because we can't flame harden." I said, "But you could always make water shields so you can flame harden." Because the trouble is, the cam that's next to the bearing journal, you didn't want it to heat that journal.
Yeah.
So at any rate, there were several things that we did, and I'll never forget the guy from Mobile, now dead. We were going to put out a list of acceptable lubricants, and he threatened to sue us. And I told Mr. Metzel, and I've always called him Mr. Metzel. I don't call him Harold. It's the way it is. Anybody else can call him anything they want. But at any rate, I told him there, I said, if anybody ever threatened me like that, I'd have thrown him right out, and he'd never gotten back in.
Why did he threaten you?
Well, because we were not going to put Mobile on their oil on the list.
On the approved list?
Yeah.
Blackball, sort of.
No, not really.
Not really blackball.
No, you just said use these.
Right, he didn't have
You
a
didn't
good...
say don't use
Yeah,
them.
he didn't have a good product.
Yeah. They made some changes, I'll tell you, in a hurry. But at any rate, that was, to me, but my point is, in telling that story, Lowell Kinnig was the kind of a guy you wanted to please. You really liked him. Everybody liked him. He was one of the most popular engineers we ever had. And the way I described this to the students in the class that I teach at Michigan State is that here I was winning a popularity contest instead of being an engineer and telling him, we can't do it, Lowell. And it cost Oldsmobile a lot of money. But it was, you know, you fix it and that's that. It's in the past, but the reason I tell those stories, I just don't want people to trap themselves into trying to please their boss, because sometimes you can't please him or her, whatever the case may be. I was privileged to work, and those are some of the stories relative to design. I spent more time probably with General Motors research than anybody at Oldsmobile. I spent a lot of time there, and I had a lot of freedom. I remember Gilbert Burrow telling me once, he said, Butler, he said, we can only afford one of you. But I had all this freedom, and I went every place. I did anything I always worked for Oldsmobile. I didn't say I'm going to General Motors research and I go off doing something else. I did that.
Let me ask you, in your experience with the engines, what about the 62 Jetfire with a turbocharged fluid-injected engine? Were you on that engine?
I told about that while you were on the telephone.
All covered.
Excuse me.
Yeah, it was my idea to do it.
When did you leave Oldsmobile? When did you retire?
June 1st of 1981.
1981.
I'd like to tell about the end of my career.
Oh, go right ahead.
Will you cover aluminum engines someplace in there?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll tell about, because she asked the question.
Sure.
I'll tell you about the end of my career. I was working on a study, the outlook for diesel fuel to the year 2000, and I wanted to finish it. I had no retirement party, no nothing. On Friday afternoon of May the 29th, Bob Dorshemer and a lot of the people came down by my office, and they gave me one of these, let's call it a plaque with all these names signed on it. And that was the only retirement gift I received. I wanted to do something for my people I'd worked with. I had the only library of books in engineering. So I gave them to my peers at Oldsmobile. And I told them how much fun I'd had working for Oldsmobile for 40 years. And after about 3 or 4 minutes of that malarkey, I left them with this, which appeared originally on a plaque in the engineering quadrangle at the University of Michigan. I can't remember the dean who said it, but that's not important. When theory and experiment don't agree, use your horse sense. Then I told them it was time to go back to work, and that was that, because I wanted to finish. I worked on that report till, I worked on it Friday night, I worked on it all day Saturday night. Sunday I went in at 8 o'clock, and I worked till 10 o'clock at night, and that was my last day. That ended my career. That was May the 31st. I don't think that that's a good example of what people should do. It was what I did, not, I don't want it to be thought of as something that's worth a lot of commendation or anything like that. It does not.
It was something you really wanted.
I enjoyed doing it. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. Because I didn't even get it finished in, but I took it home and didn't finish it.
Now that was on the diesel engine.
No, diesel fuel.
Diesel fuel.
Yes, I was involved with the engine studies that brought about the diesel engine. We did a future engine study. There were several of us involved. I can't remember the parts of it. I did most of it. I did the turbine and the rotary engine, which was the Wankel and something else. And then Tom Leonard did the regular engine, as I recall. That made a difference, just the way we... But the diesel engine came about as a result of that study. Because by this time I was working in energy economics. And I worked with the greatest energy economist this country's ever had. His name is John Winger. He was vice president in charge of energy economics at Chase Manhattan Bank in New York. Respected all over the world by rulers. We still stay in touch. We call each other once in a great while. We call to Africa, the telephone bill goes up like...
Right.
But I did work on energy economics for off and on, and I'd go to New York a lot. And I worked alone. And the reason I got into this was because we, Oldsmobile, didn't believe what they were telling us in Detroit. So Bob Dorsheimer decided we should do our own thing. One of the interesting things about that energy economics study was that Mr. Winger kept telling me, he'd say, you know, he said, we were in sort of this was before the oil embargo.
It was before 74.
Yeah, this was in 72. And he'd say, you know, there's a lot of money in just straight savings accounts available. He said, people just aren't spending it. And he'd say, you know, he said, but that money's available to us. But we were concerned at that time about an energy shortfall to occur in 1976. I say we. I mean, I was influenced by his thinking. A 20% energy shortfall worldwide, which would have resulted in 12% unemployment across the board. 8% is a major depression. Now, when I talk about energy now, I'm not talking just about petroleum. I'm talking about hydropower, coal, natural gas, But the thing is that petroleum is the only source of primary energy used in all of the energy markets. The only one. So it becomes a great concern. Well, one of the things that I remember having Freiberg and somebody else on the telephone once, and Dorsheimer once was talking to Winger while I did the question talk. He and I carried on the conversation. Those guys listened.
Squawk box.
Yeah. And I saw beads of sweat come out on their heads. You know, they were really afraid. They said, "You don't go out telling everybody this." I said, "No." I said, "I don't tell anybody." I said, "But I know what's going to happen." Along came the oil embargo. I could have gotten down on the ground and I could have kissed the ground, and old Giamatti walked up. He saved our bloody necks. And people didn't know that. But prior to this, an interesting thing happened. I was talking to Bill Buxton, who was I used to go and see Bill about maybe once every 2 weeks or 3 months. So he gets some ideas, you know, what are people saying out there. I kept telling him about this energy thing, and I said, there's a lot of money in, savings accounts. And I'd say, Mr. Winger keeps telling me about all this money available. So one day I was over at Buxton's office, and he closes the door, and he said, let's get Mr. Winger on the telephone.
Now, at that time, Bill Buxton was general sales manager.
This is right. So I got him on the telephone, and I told him what I had, and I started the conversation for about 5 minutes, let's say. I don't know how long, but let's say 5 minutes. And then Bill got into the conversation, and we must have been on that stupid phone for an hour. And at any rate, when it was over with, I wasn't involved, but he told Colleen Seymour, who was then his secretary, to get Fleming and I think George Clemison, but I'm not sure. And I think his name was in marketing. He's no longer there anyhow. And they went out, and he told them about this money in savings accounts. And he said, we're not going to push the big cars.
Oh.
We're going to go out and push the Cutlass.
Ah.
And they had sales, I don't know how they did this, I wasn't involved. But they had sales meetings all over the country, however they do this, I wasn't in sales, what the hell do I know
get him
about
eventually.
And so they had I'm not sure, maybe the advertising agency or somebody, they set up this new sales pitch. And they concentrated on the Cutlass, and our Cutlass sales went up like that. Yep.
Number one?
Yeah. Later, Mr. Winger wanted to buy a new car. I told Buxton. He called him. God, I can't think of his name. It was in marketing. Real brilliant guy, hot-tempered as hell. But anyway, he called him in, and he told him to get, or maybe it was Fleming, well, maybe both, I don't know. He told him to get a hold of the dealer right next to where Mr. Winger would buy a car. And he told him, you don't have some salesman go see him. You send the dealer. Or maybe somebody from his own office, I suppose. I don't remember the details. They sold him the car at cost. No, not discounted, like,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I was able to help Mr. Winger's son, Tom. Couldn't graduate from college, he couldn't find himself. I had him come to Lansing for a couple of days. And, finally I got him into computer science, and that's what he's doing very well at. You can always return the favors they do for you.
Sure. It's good.
You tell us about the aluminum engine.
The aluminum engine was a development. It started off at the design itself was done at engineering staff. Gerald Karras was then head of the called now Advanced Product Engineering. It used to be called Product Studies, number 4. The aluminum engine was originally designed so that we could die cast engines, which a die cast engine is a lot cheaper and easier to make than a sand casting, and easier to do. However, then the engine was a 215 cubic inch displacement, and it was given to Oldsmobile and Buick together to develop. But with all the jealousies, do you remember the turkey roaster?
Mhm.
Well, we had to have something that looked different, so we did make the thing look different, but that was dumb. At any rate, we never did get to die cast it. There were always semi-permanent mold castings. But I'm going to tell you something. After we sold the machinery, Gilbert Burrow and I were sitting there one day, looking at this stupid aluminum engine. And Gilbert said, "Holy." You could hear a string of invective from here. He was mad. We missed the boat. It was simple. We could have made a die cast out of it. Had Dollar Jarvis, all these people working on this damn thing. And all we had to do to make, a V8 is hard to die cast, but all we had to do to make that a die cast possibility was to take those lifter bosses out of there. We would have made them on a separate, I hope I don't lose you, my dear, but this is the way it
Okay.
goes.
Fine, go right ahead.
Made them on a separate casting, which would have been a die casting.
Mhm.
Then now you can die cast the block, because you can get the dies down in there and pull
Sure.
it, okay? And then same from the bottom up, all right? Then you would take that other casting, you would semi-finish it, and you would put it in place, you would dowel it in and bolt it. Now you'd finish the engine. And we could have made a die cast engine. Unfortunately, by this time we had sold the machinery to Rover, and they still built that engine, Rover. We tried to buy it back, we being General Motors.
Mhm.
They wouldn't sell it to us. But there was, you asked about an aluminum engine. There was the,
Was that their first blush at aluminum that you remember? Or did you do some work earlier on that hit and miss sort of
we
stuff?
did, we always looked at, we were constantly looking at new things.
Mhm.
Aluminum was not new, no.
Yeah.
We had made some aluminum engines cast, but I think there are some important things. It was not brand new, although this die casting technology had improved, all these things that had happened. Yet here again we failed because we weren't putting our thinking caps on.
Mhm.
But I would like to go back a little bit. You're talking about engines. There are some very important things that Oldsmobile contributed. Charles L. McEwen came from Rickenbacker. He had designed engines in World War I. He worked for Rickenbacker, and then when Rickenbacker was absorbed by General Motors, he and Tony Waters and Bob Schilling and Orland Anderson all came from Rickenbacker to Oldsmobile, and C.L. McEwen was the motor engineer. Incidentally, I want to stop a moment and tell you an interesting little side note. Bob Schilling's name, who's of German birth, was Bob Schitke. When he went to Detroit, General Motors asked him to change his name. From Bob Schitke, and he chose Schilling. That's how he became Bob Schilling. But I just thought I'd tell that. That's interesting.
That is cute.
Uh,
I'm
It-
afraid I would have thought to change it before I was asked.
Well, but he came from Germany. It was a
It was
common
a
name.
normal
It,
name.
it didn't mean a thing. It didn't.
Didn't have the connotation.
No.
we-
At any rate, the Line 8 and the Line 6 at Oldsmobile were designed under C.L. McEwen, but there were two other engines that were designed under C.L. McEwen line engines, and they wouldn't let Oldsmobile build them, so they gave them to Pontiac. They were lighter engines, a 6 and an 8.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, those were, and they were lighter castings. They were better engines, actually, but also under C.L. McEwen was the Viking, which was a V8 engine, was designed and developed. From a technology standpoint, the great thing that happened with the Viking engine, it was the first integrally cast V8 engine, or V-block of any kind. By that it means it was not bolted together after the casting. It was cast in one piece, these two bays. The two men that were the great contributors to this were Gordon Bygraves, who owned Lansing Patter, which is really a captive shop, still in business, and C.L. McEwen. And they got this idea that they could do this. Now this changed V8 or V-type engine casting technology for all time. It was, to me, one of the truly great developments. The Viking, of course, the dealers didn't want it. It was a depression thing, and I wasn't. The things I tell you are more hearsay than by others. However, C.L. McEwen and I became really close friends, odd as it may seem. He was the first vice president in charge of engineering. And that's where I first started to communicate with him. And then he was, when Mr. Kettering retired, he became in charge of General Motors Research. Mr. McEwen was orphaned, and I think at 5, but I can't really. I don't really remember. I never knew a man in my life more devoted to his wife than Mr. McEwen. At any rate, how we really became close to each other was actually because we were both Masons. Mr. McEwen was very proud of his Masonic membership. He was a member, and he was a member of the Knights Templar in Lansing like I was. But when he used to come to Lansing, here he is an executive, his daughter would call me up and say, she was Bill Turinen's wife, and she'd say, "Daddy's coming to Lansing. Would you have lunch with him?" He was terribly shy. So I'd have lunch with him. Of course, the tragedy of Mr. McEwen's life was that he went over the wall in that Firebird, down at the proving ground, the turbine car. But at any rate, he did get back to work. But when I remember when his wife died. I can't remember the year exactly. It doesn't make any difference. But I was at research, and the fellows told me that Mrs. McEwen had died, so I went to the funeral home, which is out, I don't know, in Troy or something. Maybe, I don't remember. It was a Hamilton funeral home anyhow. And he saw me coming, and apparently I was the first one there. And his family was there. There was Marshall McEwen and Noel McEwen and Bill Turin and his wife and everything. He said to them, "Why don't you all go home?" He said, "Because Gibson and I are going to talk." Excuse me. I don't have any idea how long we sat there, but it didn't make any difference. He told me about his long marriage. I don't know why he didn't want his kids there, but they weren't there. That's all I can tell you. But they used to have these garage shows, and I'd go down there. The garage show meant that they displayed all their stuff that they'd done for the year, done a research, what they wanted, and then they'd invite executives in. And I'd go down, and Mr. McEwen would conduct me around, and people would say, you could see him. Who's he? Well, I have a description for what I was. I used to tell people that, well, I don't know what I am, but I can tell you what I do. Every Saturday I go in and somebody hands me a broom and says, push. At any rate, those are some of my relationships in General Motors that are mine, you know, but they were fun to think about, but you can't live in the past. You cannot live there. You cannot, after I've done this, I don't even want to talk about it anymore for a long, long time. I don't.
But you're the only guy that can describe that to us.
That's probably true. I don't mean
So,
that.
yeah.
Because you've had so many close personal experiences with the people.
Well, because I worked alone.
Well, you've
So many
already
years.
told us about a good many of the executives too, and the
Oh,
people
yes.
who worked on the engines.
Well, there were, yes, and I did have a lot of opportunities because, one, you're trusted. If you aren't trusted, there's only one word that describes what an engineer should do. And so there are only 5 letters, T-R-U-T-H. That's all that counts. That conducts your whole life. And if you can't do that, you're in trouble. I do have a little philosophy that I think helps me. I don't know that it'll help anyone else. I have 2, but actually one of them, St. Thomas, or Thomas Aquinas, was truly a very brilliant man. And I've always been interested in his writings, and I'm not a Catholic, so they don't attach that to it. He just was a brilliant philosopher. But he said something once that really, when you think about it, it says so much. It is far greater to know little about greater things than a lot about lesser things. And really, that's true. It keeps you motivated. My personal associations are generally, or most frequently, with people in the scientific or the technical roles, and primarily because I don't know very much, and I'm continually wanting to acquire new knowledge.
Gib, you mentioned both Mr. Freiberg and Mr. Dorshimer. How did you feel about those men as engineers, as inventors, as men? You want to talk about that? You also knew Mr. Belts, too.
As chief engineer or executives, for me, I'm talking about chief engineer now, nobody compared to Mr. Metzel, none of them. He was always receptive to new things. He didn't allow money to stand in the road of development. Dorshimer rather inhibited progress because he was out.
F. Gibson, Butler, tape 2. Okay, we're on the tape.
Well, I'll go back.
Back up a little bit, if you would.
I don't know where I will back up to, but I'll say this. Mr. Metzel was my favorite chief engineer. Mr. Wolfram was aloof and cold.
What about Mr. Metzel?
I just
Mr. Belts.
I mean, Carol. Carol was the one I meant to ask.
Howard Carroll and I got along very well. We communicated well, and it did all the time we knew each other. Even when I seen him, in fact, the day I retired, that Friday, he called me up. And I remember, I can't think of his name, who was head of the department at the time, and said, why would he call him? And Kenneth said, he called him because he likes him.
Good enough reason.
Well, I mean, was her reason. I called me and did it, and that was wonderful. There were, at any rate, we had wonderful communication. John Belch was cruel to Howard Carroll, absolutely cruel. I don't care what anyone says, it's unfortunate. John Belch had really the world by the tail, if you want to say it that way. But he could be very vulgar and very cruel. He was very popular with the press. And you hear people talk about how far we go, and I'd say garbage. I still say that. I can't help it because he's dead. And I do know that he would have gone a long way. The press liked him. He always had some glib, smart retort to anything that was said. But for me, he just didn't compare to Mr. Menzel. Yet Mr. Menzel was his mentor. John Belch was an interesting guy. I knew him from the time he started.
I thought you may have known
He came as a clerk. That's where we used to start some of those guys in the lab. I think Dorshimer had the potential for being a great engineer, but Dorshimer's greatest drawback was not thriftiness, stinginess. That is the better word. He was actually stingy. He not only was, he was stingy with himself personally, for all of his ability to communicate. And it carried itself over into the way, you know, we did things, kind of. I feel that Oldsmobile could have done more than we did.
What about Walt Freiberg? I know he wasn't the chief engineer, or was he for a while?
No.
No.
What about Mr. Freiberg? Did you work with him? Did you know him? You want to comment on
Don't want to say anything.
all right.
See, there was one other aluminum engine I remember. Somewhere in the 60s. Not the little V8, but a bigger V8.
But we didn't build it.
But we didn't build it. What happened? You remember?
We still weren't die casting. We didn't. The other thing is we could build an iron engine so cheap.
Okay.
We designed a new iron engine, if you recall.
Yes.
Redesigned the rocket so we'd get it lighter.
Yeah.
It's the aluminum. We had aluminum heads. I can't remember if we actually put those on an engine or not.
Well, we
By
had.
this time, you see, I was not,
Okay.
from 1965 on, I was never directly involved with what was being produced because
All right.
we were separated. Gilbert Burrow and myself were doing all these other things.
Okay.
We did have a design of a new cylinder head that would have really helped our fuel economy and would have been a big improvement, but we needed $20 million to put it in production, and they wouldn't give it to us.
Yeah.
By this time, the era of the bean counter had become, like when we wanted to build a Stirling engine, and we wanted to build 2 and 2 cars. Metzel told us, he said, well, if this had been 1960, I'd have told you to go ahead, but now we have the financial people looking over our shoulders constantly, and we didn't have the same opportunities.
Did that take some of the, what I'll call the fun out of the thing a little bit?
Oh, you never let anything take any fun out of it. You just,
Okay.
you don't let those people stop.
All right.
They, I think there's another person that deserves some recognition, and that's Bob Stemple. Bob Stemple graduated from Worcester Polytechnic. I don't know exactly, I can't remember the town in New Jersey that he came from, but I know that he did mechanics work, you know, as a kid in school and that, and probably earned money that way. But he went to Worcester Polytech. And he came to Oldsmobile just looking for a job. And George Jones told him that he'd give him a job. The only thing he could give him, though, was as a senior detailer on the board. Bob Stemple started at Oldsmobile. He's got a tremendous personality. He's extremely capable of absorbing knowledge, of envisioning things that are going to happen. And he has got a super personality with this great communications ability. Bob Stemple had worked on the Tornado. I don't remember all the details because I wasn't in that group, but he did work on the suspension, and he'd go to Detroit and talk about this thing. And people observed that he's now probably a senior layout man, maybe a designer, I don't know. And he knew more about it than all the executives. And it was Ed Cole that really recognized him. Bob, he told somebody they better do something about the guy. Ed Cole, that is. He then became transmission engineer. No, head of the transmission design group. Then he went into the motor group. By this time, Gilbert is out of it. Myself. Frank Ball is motor engineer. Bob became assistant motor engineer. This isn't exactly the way it happened. How in the hell did it happen? Because it was late in the 60s. And then he became motor engineer, then assistant chief engineer. And he wasn't on that long when he went down on Ed Cole's staff. And I wanted to bring him up because I think it's only fair to Oldsmobile, its name and all that it stands for, right, to recognize these kind of people. Yeah. I was fortunate that 2 weeks ago, I go to the University of Michigan Management Conferences each year at Traverse City as a guest of David Cole and the University of Michigan. I've been a friend of Dave's since he was in college. I sort of befriended him as a young engineer. And on the first day of the seminars, Bob Stemple was one of the speakers. And I spoke to him. And then a little later, he said, "Hey, Gib," he said, "I have a chance to eat with you." You know, I thought it was pretty nice.
Oh, it did.
It wouldn't mean anything to anybody but me, I suppose.
Oh, sure.
I'm emotional too, you know, I'm a human being. Or at least I tell
That's
people.
great.
And so we did, up at Traverse City. A lot more outstanding than John Belt's.
Now, as I understand it, you're teaching at MSU.
I teach as a visiting professor. It started when I was at Oldsmobile. This was an arrangement between Michigan State University and Oldsmobile.
What do you teach?
I teach a course the number of the course is ME 406. There's 4 indicating that's senior level.
Now, what does that mean?
And it means it's a course in automotive engines, but it's engines of all kinds. I was asked to do this when I was still at Oldsmobile, and I didn't have to do it, but Bob Dorshemer and Frank Ball were the fellows at Oldsmobile that kept talking to me, and they'd say, "We really appreciate it if you do it," because I got nothing. So I did it. I designed the course, and in general it's taught about the same way. There is a limit on the number that can take it. We allow only 70 in the class. I can't handle more than that. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a professional teacher. Yeah. We have guest lecturers from General Motors Research. In fact, just last week I talked to Chuck Aumann, who is the head of engine research, and we'll have a meeting the first week in October, and all the people that are going to do guest lecturing. And the other thing is that all the notes that are used are provided, the Xeroxing is provided by Oldsmobile. They support the program.
Sure, that's nice.
Howard Carroll told me once that when I saw him, if I ever had any trouble, just give him a ring. Well, imagine me doing that, because Howard Carroll has such a terrible temper that I'd have lost every friend I ever had.
How often do you teach? How often is your
Three.
class?
3 mornings, it's taught only in the winter term, 3 mornings a week at 8 o'clock.
How long is the class?
50 minutes. 50 minutes.
50 minutes.
It's a one period or one, you know. I like to have it a little longer, but then I do. But it's so, it doesn't make motor engineers out of anybody because it covers the whole gamut. But when 8 o'clock comes, the class starts.
Is that a credit course?
Oh yes, there's three credits.
3 credit course. Do you have girls too? Is
Oh
that
yes,
so?
the outstanding student so far is Kathy Emmerman. I don't know her married me, but she was really unique. Just wonderful. I just loved her. Had her the first year. I had a girl this year that had 8 job offers. She's going to be super as an engineer.
Not many of those existed when you started, though. 40 years ago, I mean, when you
Oh, no.
started engineering.
Although I remember the first woman engineering graduate of Michigan Tech, I was in high school, 1928. Her dad was a mining engineer, and she wanted to be a mining engineer, and she became a mining engineer. See, one of the things to remember, that in a state-owned school, you can't restrict it.
Oh, I appreciate that. You just didn't find them there.
Yeah. It's, but I always remind people, when you talk about women engineers, the lack of them or their successes, I always say, did you ever read the book Cheaper by the Dozen? That was about a woman engineer.
Right.
12 children she bore in addition. So, I mean, because we haven't recognized them, although we've had some wonderful women contributors to engineering. So, you know, and you're most likely you found them in pure science a lot of the time, but they've been there, and there are some great ones.
Oh, yeah.
And anybody that knows me knows that I promote women. I have for a long, long time. It's not. I came from a family where all of the women were college graduates, including my grandmother. Each was successful in their own way. So I just accept that women engineers are going to be there. It's unfortunate that we haven't seen to it that we should. I'd rather have a pregnant woman working for me than any man that's lazy.
Amen.
Yeah.
Where'd you go to school again?
Michigan Tech.
Michigan Tech.
Now called, it didn't, let's see, it used to be called,
Houghton School of Mines.
oh, that was one time. It was called Michigan College of Mining and
Oh, yeah.
Technology.
Okay, that
And
was
then it became Michigan Technological University. My dad went there. I have an uncle that went there. He's dead now, a cousin. See, we came from a carpenter. We came from a mining family. And I would have been a mining engineer, but there were a dime a dozen in the Depression.
Aren't you glad that you took the route that you did? I think
Not
Oldsmobile
necessarily.
is- But you've been happy in it. You've
Well,
been
but I
happy.
would have been, if I was an engineer, that's happiness in itself.
So you-
Subject not important.
So
Yeah.
you didn't go astray in your career selection.
Not necessarily. No, I didn't go straight, but if I had been a mining engineer, I would have loved it.
Because you do like the outdoors.
Yes, and I like geology and paleontology, all of these things. I like mining. And while I am a conservationist, I am not a preservationist. See, I feel people should use resources. Use them wisely and judiciously. But along that line, just a week ago, last Sunday, I drove to the Fiborn karst area, and a karst is a natural cave in limestone. We have only one great karst area in Michigan.
Where is that?
It's near Trout Lake, which is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I drove up the Nature Conservancy and the Michigan Karst Conservancy purchased this 460-some acre area and are keeping it as a reserve, a preserve, I should say. And I represented the Explorers Club, president of the Explorers Club, and I went to help with the dedication. I drove up and back same day.
Oh, you had quite a long day.
Yeah, I drove up and gave the speech and came home. It's 270 miles from here.
Are you a member of the Nature Conservancy?
I am not. My major memberships are these. They're the...
Sierra Club.
Well, I helped start it in Michigan. But they don't like engineers, or they didn't like engineers. There were two of us, and they didn't really... Engineers sort of anathema to some of in that period of time, because there are a lot of people just objecting to everything.
Right.
My memberships are the Society of Automotive Engineers, or SAE, the Engineering Society of Detroit, which is truly a great society. It's the world's largest, covering all branches of engineering. They have a gorgeous building in Detroit. The Rackham Building was given to the Engineering Society of Detroit by Horace Rackham. It is really a beautiful structure, right south of the museum. The other professional society that I belong to is the Explorers Club, which is a multidisciplinary professional society interested in the field research and scientific exploration. And we are explorers. You can't be... I noted in the paper last week that some man in Fowlerville they got it in the paper that he became a member, but they imply that his work he became a member, but he isn't a fellow. There's a big difference. A fellow is somebody, you have to do scientific exploration. I am a fellow of the Explorers Club. But it's avocational. It doesn't have to be vocational, because this is what we do. And I spend a lot of time in it. I was in 3 weeks ago, I think it was, just before I went to Traverse City. I went to Ely, Minnesota to see Will Steger, who's planning a transatlantic expedition of dogs to start next year. And it's going to be great. It's an $8 million expedition. The Russians are going to do the scientific part of it. And I talked to them last spring into studying the ozone hole, which they're going to do in the Antarctic. And the French are going to do a medical study, and they've already put $2 million into the expedition. And Will Steger, of course, is going to run the thing. On that same trip, I stopped in Duluth, Minnesota to visit a man by the name of Robert Logan, who is 96 years old and has been a member of the Explorers Club since 1925. In World War I, he was a Nova Scotian by birth. In World War I, he was shot down by the Red Baron. He was in the Canadian Air Force. But we had a great visit, which I taped, about what is exploration today. It used to be geographical, but now we're concerned with the universe. And we are, in fact, one of the things we're doing, one of my friends is working on looking at the valleys in the Antarctic, and this has to do with our Mars landing. And you think, I know. And don't tell me we aren't going to do it, because we are.
Oh, sure we will.
I mean, it's just...
You bet.
But this is my life. I don't ask anybody, I don't try to bore people with it. I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to set myself up as somebody unique. I am not. I just have been fortunate.
Well, you're very interesting, Gil.
I think
Very interesting.
it's, well, this is what I do. I spent, let's see, yesterday I spent, Mrs. Harsh who was the manager of the Explorers Club in New York, called me and we talked for an hour. Doesn't happen very often, thank goodness. But I'm trying to get Isaac Asimov here for November the 15th. I think I'll make it. To talk at the Wharton Center. We're going to do 2 programs in cooperation with the museum. We'll do one at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I told the museum, I insist that no one be admitted except students.
Interesting.
They think I'm, nobody wants to talk to me about, in my class, if you're a member of the faculty, you may visit the class, but you must sit in the back. Absolutely. You cannot sit up front. Because what happens when it comes to asking questions, the students are reticent. So these faculty take over. I watched this happen once, and that's awful. Didn't happen in my class. Everybody knows, don't ever walk into the class and interrupt. Because they say his temper shows up. Well, you know, I get paid for doing that thing. I don't get a lot, but I get $4,500 a year. There's a lot of preparation. But the students have an investment. They have a right to expect your undivided attention all during that class period. And what I do, the last day of class, I give each student one of my business cards. And then they have the privilege of calling me anytime in their future, so long as I'm able to speak. They can call me about personal things, anything they want.
That's a nice gesture on your part.
I don't know, I probably am not popular with the faculty, I don't have any idea. I don't go to faculty meetings. I don't do anything like that. The dean of the College of Engineering, who has agreed to stay 2 more years. He was supposed to retire this year. So he said to me the other day, he said, if I stay 2 years, are you going to stay 2 years? I said, yeah, I'll stay 2 years if you stay 2 years. I'm too old to be playing crazy games with people. And so, at any rate, he and I get along very well. And like when I go to the University of Michigan conferences and things like that, Michigan State will pick up the expenses. The University of Michigan pays the registration area. But I don't tell anybody out there. It comes out of the dean's budget. But everybody knows that I talk to the dean. But he was in industry too. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot in common. My experiences at the university, I used the university like I owned it. I just walk into offices, nobody. I don't have much to do with the faculty, as I said, because it can create problems, and I'm not about to do that.
Gib, would you mind having your picture taken in connection with
I might break the darn camera.
I doubt it.
No, we hope that you want to do that.
I'll do it.
We set it up with Roger Betcher. Would you mind swinging around?
You know where
to
Roger Betcher, Leavenworth, on Olds Avenue, just west of the plant?
I'll take you over there. You can follow me over.
Okay.
We've got it set up.
I'll give you my card.
Okay.
I want to tell you why I have it. Before I left Oldsmobile, I wanted something that fit me. I wanted it to be distinctly mine. And so I went to Tom O'Brien, who was expensive as the devil, but that didn't stop me.
He's one of the best.
Well, I happen to like Tom.
Nice man.
He and I get along very well. He's had a tough road to hoe too. I don't think he hasn't. That doesn't make a difference. He's got a lovely family.
Yes, he does have.
2 beautiful daughters. The one I knew. Oh, here's my card. It is a.
Oh, isn't that nice? Well, thank you.
My stationery is like this too.
Mm-hmm.
What that is
Thank you.
a peregrine falcon done as a study in the dynamics of flight, as if Leonardo were doing it. Because he only detailed that part that he was interested in. Now you may wonder why I chose a Falcon. 1, they don't eat carrion. 2, they are fast. 3, they are direct. 4, they are decisive. And I hope this represents the way I wish to be.
It's a good
It's a
analogy.
fitting ending to a lovely interview. We really appreciate the.
Well,
time
there's a lot
you
more,
spent
and
with us.
I could talk for a day, because I knew a lot of people. I'll tell you something I knew, somebody I knew, that you won't have many interviewees in here. I knew the first employee of Oldsmobile.
Charlie Blades?
Yes, I did. Charlie Blades was in his 80s. And I remember he'd come into that plant. This was when I was in plant engineering. And he'd go out in that plant and he'd get lost. Holy cow. We'd have to go look for him.
Oh, my Lord.
And seems to me Bob Cook, not Bob Cook.
Wait, there was manager.
No, not
manager.
There was a Bob Cook that was, I don't know, what did we call it? It seemed we called it plant protection. I really don't know. But those of us in plant engineering, because we knew the plant so well, they'd ship us out because they're always afraid you'd fall in one of those damn Bondurite tanks or
a
something.
pit
Do you remember
or
those
something.
things?
Oh, sure.
Did
Charlie tell you anything? Talk to you much? And you
Yes,
remember
he did.
anything about
Yeah.
what he would tell you?
There was another man there that was Petoskey. Can't think of his first name. Oswald. Yeah, Charlie used to talk about having worked with. I also knew R.E. Olds. In fact, Olds Anderson is one of my friends. But
Fine man.
yeah, I like Olds. He and I get along super. Anyway, Charlie Blades used to talk about Mr. Olds. I can't remember any specifics. He always talked about being a Mason. Because I was one. I have been since I was 21. It's not important. It's only important to me, I guess. But it was important to him. And, but he was just a grand gentleman.
We found a lot of photographs of him in our
I bet you do.
files of photographs.
Did you find anything in writing? Probably not.
Nothing.
No, we haven't yet.
Unfortunately, nothing.
Someplace, but I don't know if it's in writing. There was an agreement, and maybe it was just a handshake or a verbal agreement, when Oldsmobile was sold to General Motors, that Mr. Blades would have a job all his life, because he was in his 80s and he still got paid. They don't do things like
You don't do things like that anymore.
He was a unique individual.
And it's very unfortunate that we didn't have a way of capturing those kinds of people in those days.
Well, yeah, though Mr. Olds could have been gotten on wire
recording. Yeah.
I don't think people thought that.
But they didn't
far.
think of that sort of
Significance
thing.
of recording that.
There's a
part of
picture, one black and white picture someplace of R.E. Olds and Gilbert Burrow with the rocket engine.
I think we found that. The new rocket.
Yeah. I don't remember when that was taken.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, I
wondering-
suppose you guys should go,
Yeah,
huh?
I'm
Well, I don't
wondering,
care whether I
why
go
don't I
or-
call Roger?
Well, you do what you want, my dear. I just,
Tell-
you don't need my picture. I'll just
Oh,
leave
yeah.
it.
Oh, yes,
We
we've
would
got
like
it
your
all
picture.
set
Here were
up.
some names that I had written down that people, well, like, these fellows all worked at Plant engineering, and a couple I remember. I didn't write a lot of them down, but I should.
Yeah, and some of these people are still around. George Bernser's still around.
And George Hendy's still around.
And George Hendy.
Hazel Aiken, I believe, is around.
Bill Mounts is
No,
gone.
he's dead.
Ralph Mosier, I don't know whether Ralph's still around or
I
not.
think he is, but he
I
lives in
think-
Texas.
That's okay, we're going to Texas.
That Bob Mooney is not the
Not
Bob
the
Mooney.
Robert that died.
No.
Yeah.
His father was the, was,